Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and what I have here is some roasted chestnuts. And it was months ago when I found this stuff in the cabinet and decided it was way over its expiration date to be considered human food anymore. And I went ahead and fed some systems with this stuff, and I had three left, and it just seemed like hanging on to three packets of chestnuts that are basically for worm food was almost made to order for feeding my European night crawlers that I've got in these three buckets over here. The Euros have been working these three buckets for a pretty good time now, 180 days, and they've been fed 14 times over that time span. And speaking of 14, 14 is actually the interval of days. We've been keeping two for 10 feedings now in between feedings of these systems. So today, on their 14th feeding, they are now being fed after 14 days since the most recent check-in. So let's get these little guys hooked up with some of this yummy chestnut. Even though the space in these systems is rather limited, we've done pretty good. We've been able to even adopt a special feeding pattern, which was to alternate the side of the container that we feed each time, switching it from one side to the other, and always leaving behind one of these coffee filters to show us where we last fed. So since that was the place we fed last time, we're going to feed over on this side next time, but it's always an interesting curiosity to check in how the previous feeding is coming along, how it's holding up. Now, I did not check the video from last time, so I'm not really prepared with any sort of refresher information to remind me how things were in here, or if I was intending to do anything out of the ordinary in any of these systems. I guess the reason I like to run multiple systems kind of parallel to each other, or with the same schedule and the same basic regimen, is because it's really nice to have very realistic and very relevant points of reference right there next to the system that you might be having some sort of issue that you're trying to troubleshoot, because knowing that the other systems that are pretty much clone copies of what you're having problems with are doing fine, then at least you have some sort of rest assurance that it's not your process that's screwed up, it's just something specific to that bin, whatever the case may be. So I don't know, to me it just seems like an easy way to help eliminate potential causes of issues when you've got sort of controls like that in place. So I didn't see anything. I guess we can take one more quick glance, but it is pretty remarkable to see how things are getting broken down in these systems. I treated these systems as being a little bit, I don't know, handicapped in a way, because we took the inhabitants of a single bin of mine and we split that population into three to populate these three containers. So to me, my best estimate for how many worms started each of these containers, it was no more than a few hundred. I think maybe 400 was the rough estimate. We figured maybe 1,200 was the population of the bin that these guys used to live in when they were all together. Then we just evenly split it three ways. But I think we also acknowledged that some bins appeared to have more worms in them based just on their capability to break down foods quicker than the other systems, since all the systems have been getting fed pretty equally. Man, it's amazing how these systems have progressed over the past month or so. I think it was only during one of the most recent check-ins, maybe 2 feedings ago, when we finally started noticing in here how there's just so many castings. And that could have something to do with the fact that the weather's warmed up nicely now and we're in summer. Because in the wintertime, when these systems began in the cool basement that they live in, could have slowed them down, could have resulted in slightly slower feeding patterns. But as things warm up, I typically tend to assume that the worm activity is going to increase. And then, not only that, after After 180 days, you got to assume that the worms that populated this system originally have since mated, and with that much time, even their babies would be fully grown by now, so I'm sure the population in these systems has grown since it started. And just based on the quality of the material in here, it does seem like it would be kind of a shame to contaminate all these nice castings with more bedding, or at least lots of small tiny scraps of bedding. Maybe we do want to give them a little bit of bedding, but something that's kind of large and can stay intact and could easily be extracted as a whole later if need be, if we wanted to just maybe proceed to sifting the material and harvesting the castings or something. Maybe it would be beneficial to also start seeing the material in these systems dry. I mean, I know there's not a lot of surface area on the top, so it doesn't have a lot of exposure to the air, and we've got two layers of coverings here. We've got newspaper and cardboard. I'm getting an idea here. Maybe we can promote the paper that's been sitting in these systems since day one as it's as the initial covering onto which the cardboard was placed. Maybe we can finally let these hunks of paper serve a greater purpose, which is to go in and provide these worms with a little bit of what seems to be severely lacking in here, which is some bedding material. Some stuff that they could nibble on should they feel the need for a carbon food source. Because the kitchen scraps they get, like these chestnuts, those are a pretty nitrogen-rich food source. And sometimes the worms just really need some bedding material to nibble on so they can supplement the carbon intake. So I think this seems like a pretty good way to proceed. We'll give the newspaper sort of an upgrade to its function and its purpose and its role in this whole game. It'll take us down one, give us one less covering, which will permit, hopefully, the material to air out a little bit and lose some of its moisture. And you know what? We can also give them a little bit of my worm chow too. Hopefully they like that. Maybe we can even put the worm chow right on top of the paper too after we fold it over. And we'll see how that goes. I like it. I think this is a good plan. The material in here looks so nice. And after 180 days, you know, lately I've been trying to go a little bit longer in my systems, but I always resort back to the one really important criteria of feeling like you've got enough room in which to do what you want to do. And this is just starting to feel like we're at the threshold of saying, you know, we don't really want to go much bigger because it's just getting too much of a hassle to work in here anymore with so much stuff. So why don't we maybe we start steering the system towards harvest at this point. Allow for some drying, maybe start tailoring their food and bedding applications to stuff that we know is going to all vanish or be easily extracted once the time comes to do so. And now this piece of cardboard is going to be kind of flying solo down here in terms of coverage. And I don't know, I'm not sure if we're doing anything here in terms of improving airflow to help promote drying or evaporation, but if it doesn't seem like it's going to get drier, then we can always try to apply some other techniques. On to bucket number 2. So I've got to admit, on days like today, when I, for example, don't take the time to prepare for this check-in by looking to see how things went last time by reviewing the video, I feel like I'm kind of walking into a little bit more of an unknown situation. It's at times like this I feel like I find myself probably spending a little bit more time on the first bucket just to sort of reorient myself to what's happening and formulate the game plan on the fly versus feeling like I've sort of got a sense of what I want to do or not do or whatever the case may be. I mean, I know for certain, because it's sort of stuck in my mind already for a while now, that we've definitely been observing a lot of really good activity in these systems lately. This would be cantaloupe melon rind, of which I don't think we saw any leftovers. Maybe Maybe this is one of the systems that we think are perhaps a little bit behind or not quite as efficient at breaking stuff down as the others. I don't remember. So yeah, I mean, that was just my thinking in terms of how much time is spent in bucket number 1. It's usually due to a lack of preparation that I feel like I just sort of have to first assess the situation and then plan accordingly and implement the next steps accordingly. I would have to say what I'm seeing here is almost exactly the same as the other system. Good numbers of worms, lots of castings, a little bit of residual bedding mixed into it, but not much. Unusual little stack of leftovers, which I don't think we saw in the other system, or maybe I just wasn't paying close enough attention here too. Some bedding, which I don't really recall seeing in the other system. So maybe the system's just a little bit slower than the first one was. But it doesn't take away from, you know, the beautiful castings I'm seeing in here. As far as the moisture content too, because I guess we sort of decided on the whole what to do with coverings and how to solve the bedding question was based on moisture content. Here too, I think we'd probably do pretty good by bringing that old top covering newspaper down low in with the food and let the worms have at it instead of it sitting out on the top surface. It's not quite as damp though, I gotta say, as bucket number 1 was. Just don't want to lose track of our feeding zone indicator. I need that at the end. I like to mark where we last fed. Man, these systems definitely look like they're coming along good. And if there was ever a lack of worms populating these, I don't think that's the case anymore, at least not in these first two. I'm definitely seeing good numbers of Euros all over the place in this stuff, so they've done a good job kind of taking advantage of the space available in here. So, in comes our now promoted, kind of a surprise too. I'm sure this little guy wasn't expecting a promotion today. Going from the measly top covering roll to now star of the show, right down there in the middle, in the feeding area with the wormies and all the food. So I'm sure this piece of newspaper's family is very proud. Oh brother, can I get any cheesier? Alright, that's a nice little generous portion of grit. That was really just powdered eggshell, or, you know, pulverized eggshell that I use as the grit in my worm systems. Some people use crushed rock, sand, any of that would work fine. Any sort of tiny particle size material that the worms can ingest with their food into their gizzard, not into their stomach. They use a gizzard, and that's why they need that rough stuff in there to help with the breakdown of their foods. So if what we find in the third bucket, bucket number 3, is the same as what we saw here and in the previous system, then we can just follow through with the same cookie cutter approach to recycling the paper, making it into bedding, reducing coverings as a result, and then we'll be done. Come on over to bucket number 3. Let's see here. Alright, pop off the covering. This piece of paper will be right back in momentarily after we get them set up. But before we move to that, we're going to inspect how the feeding zone that was last fed 14 days ago looks in here. Here too. Moisture is almost exactly the same, almost as if it was an exact blend right in the middle of the other two systems. Like bucket 1 seemed like the Papa Bear would appear to me like it was the most moist, and then bucket number 2 was like the Mama Bear. It was the most dry, I seemed, but you know, not dangerously dry or exceedingly dry, just the driest of the 3. And then here in bucket number 3 we've got our Baby Bear, which seems to be just right. Although I guess maybe just right is not right the right way to express it. It's the one that's in between, so it's not on either of the two extremes. So the bottom line is down here, no leftovers. Yep, just kind of like what we saw in the other systems. And then we can start bringing back some material, opening up the cavity on the opposite side to give them their feeding today. Yeah, you know, I'm definitely starting to get that sense that what's left in this material is a whole bunch of stuff that's getting just harder to see because of the presence of all the castings, but there's still a good bit of food scraps. Like this would be the shell of a mango seed, I believe. Kind of a tough item. It's going to take them time to break that down. You probably saw that here too. We bumped into a few cantaloupe rinds right there. So it does seem like, for whatever reason, bucket number 1 showed the least signs of leftovers, potentially meaning it's got, for whatever reason, the greatest ability to do away with stuff. Usually attestable to just the worm count in the system, but it's really tough to say. If you just look at the material as I plow through it, all 3 systems pretty much look just like this. You know, you look everywhere and there's worms everywhere. The only thing that makes it tricky is the constraint in space. Such a small space, and just the need to reach down from above to work in the space makes it a little bit inconvenient, but certainly not a big deal. It's only because of the presence of the camera and the need to try to come up with decent footage. It's a little bit tricky, but definitely not a problem. I like these containers, I gotta say. I think it's working well for us. And it's so cool that we're able to never use plastic to help the system hang on to its existing moisture. It always managed to do perfectly with just these pieces of paper and cardboard, and now it's probably going to do just fine with only the cardboard. That's my guess. I have no concerns with the reduction of the coverings in this system. And I think the kind of the final thing for this newspaper to be used for, kind of a nice thing to finally get it down here and let the worms nibble on it. We'll see how it goes. Alright, well, I think that's pretty much it. Put these Euros back on the shelf for another couple of weeks till we check in on them again, and then at that point we're going to be really teetering on being at day 200 of age. And by then we'll be sort of nearing 15 feedings, which in the past had always sort of been sort of my average for when I would normally bring systems to a close from a everyday composting perspective. You know, at that point they would just be sort of left to forage and break the material in the system down without getting fresh stuff and breaking the existing stuff that's still in there down. So I can see foraging in the system starting up pretty soon, just based on how we're running out of room and how nice the material looks, and I guess just the possibility of us moving on beyond the yellow buckets into something different is also an appealing thing for me, at least. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. If you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.